It started with a scream, not a sound that echoed through the halls of power or spilled from the mouth of a world leader. No, it came from a tiny backwater mining colony on the edge of civilized space. A planet called Helios 7, a name barely worth a footnote on most maps. Population, 43,200. Resources, dwindling. Strategic value, none. But that's where the scream came from, a mother clutching the lifeless body of her son, eyes wide in horror, face streaked with soot and dried blood, begging someone, anyone, to stop what was happening. Her son had been vaporized for stepping too close to a landing pad. Not by accident. Not even by warning. Just because the Zalith, a dominant race in the Galactic Union, could. Because to them, humans were tolerated only when silent and servile. The footage wasn't supposed to get out. But one dock worker, scarred, sun-baked, barely hanging on to his sanity, leaked it to a fringe EarthNet channel. The video was blurry, the sound choppy, but her scream. That scream cut through everything. In 30 seconds, she became a symbol, a cry, a spark, and for the first time in decades, all of humanity watched. The United Terran Assembly, Earth's fragile, fractured representative council, held an emergency summit. Normally, these things dragged on for days, petty debates, grudges between Martian settlements and orbital elites. But this time, no one interrupted. Even the cynical diplomats shut their mouths when the footage was played. Even the cold, calculating minds of Luna's AI-assisted think tanks stalled for 3 full seconds. Because this wasn't politics. This was a violation, a humiliation. Humanity had fought so hard just to belong. Centuries of war, of technological gaps, of colonization on inhospitable rocks just to prove their worth in a galaxy run by species who thought humans were barely a rung above bacteria. And now? Now, a child was killed like an insect. And nothing would have been said, nothing would have changed, if not for that scream. On the streets of Neo-Tokyo, a crowd of tens of thousands gathered with signs that read, "We are Helios 7." In the undercities of Mars, graffiti of the mother's face appeared overnight, painted in blood red. Soldiers stationed on distant outposts sent word home. We will not serve the Union anymore. And in the orbital halls of the UTA, for the first time in a generation, every representative, every single one, voted to revoke humanity's peaceful submission status. That meant war. The Zalith ambassador laughed. "You are ants. You do not start wars with titans. You beg for crumbs and thank us for the right to exist." No one from Earth replied. Instead, the UTA cut the signal and activated Protocol Veritas, the buried initiative no one had ever expected to be used. It mobilized everything. Civilian ships were recalled and retrofitted. AI systems once built for climate control were converted into war logistics hubs. Engineers were pulled from colonies, scientists yanked from research labs. Every weapon Earth had ever built, but kept hidden from the Union, was pulled from its vault. Because Earth had been preparing. They knew this day would come. The first blow came quietly, 3 days later. A Zalith transport ship exploded mid-orbit around Yeltrax 5, a supply world rich in crystal ore. No survivors, no warning, just a charred smear in space. The second strike wasn't quiet, it was personal. Humanity took back Helios 7, not with fire, not with blood, but with unity. Hundreds of warships from across the Sol system emerged in synchronized warp, surrounding the planet like a wall of metal and fury. Every major news channel in the galaxy was forced to broadcast it live. The Zalith garrison surrendered within minutes, most of them too arrogant to even activate their shields, thinking humans wouldn't dare fire. They were wrong. What the galaxy forgot was that while other species evolved in peace, humans had evolved in conflict. On Earth, they'd slaughtered each other for thousands of years over land, gods, and oil. They learned how to turn pain into innovation, desperation into defiance. The scream of one mother turned into a roar that reached every system. And the galaxy, arrogant, ancient, and bloated with pride, had finally heard it. The Zalith didn't understand what they'd done. Not really. To them, the Helios 7 incident was a disciplinary action, not a spark. In their vast, ancient minds, humans were still the desperate newcomers, crawling into the stars on barely functioning engines, offering tribute just to be tolerated. They never asked what might happen if humanity stopped asking. Now, they were going to find out. After Helios 7 was secured, Earth didn't send diplomats or negotiators. They sent a message, a short one, beamed across every comm channel in the Galactic Union, translated into 47 core languages. It simply read, "We are awake now." That's when the tremors began. First came the boycotts. Human merchants closed their trade hubs. Mining operations shut down. Fusion fuel from Jupiter's rings stopped flowing to the outer systems. The Union depended on humans more than they admitted. Cheap labor, adaptable tech, colonies on the fringe no other race dared settle. They thought they could treat humanity like dirt and still enjoy their productivity. Now their power grids flickered. Their stations grew cold. Then came the disappearances. Key Zalith commanders began vanishing during routine patrols. One disappeared from his armored cruiser, another during a mid-orbit docking. No alarms, no wreckage, just empty ships floating in silence. Whispers spread of a secret Terran strike force, untraceable, invisible, merciless. They called it the Ghost Armada. No one knew where it launched from. Not even the UTA admitted it existed. But the results were undeniable. Ships sabotaged mid-jump. Entire squadrons neutralized. Human colonies too small to defend themselves were suddenly guarded by sleek, advanced warships the galaxy had never seen before. Ships with no registration, no diplomatic ties. Only one symbol burned into their hulls. A white flame surrounded by stars. The galaxy began to realize humans hadn't just been learning. They'd been watching. Quietly. Patiently. Building a force not for diplomacy, but for vengeance. Inside the Union's High Council, panic set in. "What do they want?" demanded Chancellor Velquar, a 10-foot-tall Avarith covered in bioluminescent scales. "Revenge," murmured one of his aides. "Or worse, justice." The Zalith tried to control the narrative. They broadcasted stories about violent humans, erratic behavior, ancient instincts. They called it primal madness. But none of it stuck, because for once the rest of the galaxy understood. The other species had suffered too. Quietly. Patiently. The Drellic were pushed off their ancestral asteroid belts. The Miru had been enslaved in secret labor camps. The Union had always looked the other way when the powerful exploited the weak. Now humanity wasn't just fighting for itself. It was becoming a symbol. Resistance groups from dozens of systems started to reach out to Earth. Secret messages, offers of help, intel, some even defected. A Miru pilot landed a stolen Zalith freighter on a human colony and offered its codes as tribute. Her name was Sina, and she quickly became a face for the movement. "We always hoped someone would rise," she said in her first broadcast. "We just never thought it would be you." The UTA didn't claim the role of leader. They didn't need to. The galaxy had already decided. The war wasn't just about Helios 7 anymore. It was about all of them. Everyone who'd ever been crushed under the Union's boot. And humans, raw, chaotic, emotional humans, were the only ones reckless enough to lead the charge. Still, Earth knew what was coming. The Zalith wouldn't back down. Not easily, They had ruled for millennia. They had weapons older than humanity's first cities, armies trained from birth, planets made entirely for war. But humanity had something the others didn't. They had purpose. No more peace treaties built on submission. No more pretending to be harmless. No more crawling for scraps at the table of the elite. This time humans would burn the table down. As the first wave of Zalith dreadnoughts began to mobilize in the Outer Rim, every Terran colony received the same encrypted signal. 3 words. Hold the line. From asteroid miners to ex-soldiers, AI engineers to deep space haulers, everyone knew what it meant. They were no longer citizens. They were soldiers now, and humanity, for the first time in centuries, was united. The first major battle wasn't planned. It was forced. A Zalith fleet jumped into orbit around Tyros 9, a human farming colony with barely enough defenses to hold off a pirate crew. Their goal wasn't conquest, it was a message. Tyros 9 had broadcasted support for the Terran resistance. Just a few lines of code. A short declaration of solidarity. The Zalith responded with fire. Their cruisers opened up from high orbit, reducing the colony's hydro farms to ash. Entire sections of the settlement cracked open from seismic ripples. They didn't even bother with warnings. They just attacked. Cold, calculated, efficient. And then they waited. They expected a surrender broadcast. Maybe a desperate plea from some shaken UTA governor. What they didn't expect was a reply from an old freighter that had been parked near the moon, registered as retired, decommissioned, rusting. It lit up like a goddamn Christmas tree. Plasma cannons unfolded from its sides. Thrusters that hadn't moved in decades roared to life. It wasn't just a freighter. It was a disguised warship, one of Earth's first black ops vessels from the forgotten Sol Defense Initiative. Everyone thought it had been scrapped after the Union treaties were signed. Everyone was wrong. In less than 3 minutes, that one freighter cut through a Zalith corvette like it was made of paper. The broadcast was brief. One voice, calm and raspy. "This is Captain Mace Vega of the ghost ship Harrow. Tyros 9 is under Terran protection. Leave or be dismantled." The Zalith fleet commander didn't leave. He laughed. 10 minutes later, 6 more Terran ships decloaked, models nobody had ever seen before. Sleek, dark-hulled, moving with precision that should have been impossible for anything that size. Each one was a prototype born out of Earth's paranoia, built during the decades humans spent pretending to be compliant. They called them Spectres. Ships designed not to dominate battlefields, but to erase them entirely. In 20 minutes, the Zalith fleet was gone. Tyros 9 survived. Barely. Hundreds dead. Thousands injured. But the colony stood. And when the galaxy saw the footage of Harrow drifting past burning wreckage, shields still humming, the image went viral across every channel that hadn't been censored. It was a turning point. The galaxy stopped calling it a rebellion. They started calling it a war. Back on Earth, the UTA council room had changed. Gone were the long speeches and ceremonial robes. They wore black now, practical, simple, direct. The kind of clothing you wore when the talking was over. The Terran Defense Minister, Annika Rowe, stood at the head of the room with her gray hair tied tight and her voice clipped. No more hesitation in her tone. "We've been playing their game for too long," she said, "and now we burn the board." On the wall behind her, a massive hologram flickered to life. The galaxy's major political zones, dozens of star systems marked in red, yellow, green. She pointed to the red. "These are where the Zalith control with force. These are the pain points. If we want to win, we don't match them head-on. We collapse their supply lines, break their morale, and make their allies question everything." Someone scoffed. A former diplomat turned military aide. "That's not how the Union fights." Rowe didn't blink. Exactly. She turned and pulled up a second map. This one labeled Operation Emberstorm. Names of colonies, hidden fleets, supply caches, resistance cells. This is how humans fight. The first Emberstorm target was Riflan, a gas giant with orbiting Zaleth mining platforms. Not militarized, but essential. Without the helium-3 refined there, Zaleth cruisers couldn't run long-range warp. The strike happened during their local night cycle. Spectres dropped out of stealth, sliced through the defenses like ghosts in the dark, and left the entire ring of platforms drifting and burning within 45 minutes. Not one human casualty. Every Terran ship was gone before the Zaleth could even mount a pursuit. By morning, 3 other critical sites had gone dark. But retaliation came quick. The Zaleth began targeting non-human sympathizers. They glassed a Miru outpost, executed an Avarith trade envoy who'd spoken in favor of Earth. They even started rounding up human civilians living off-world, labeling them combatants by association. They underestimated what that would spark. Because when the first footage surfaced of Terran children in cages, scared, dirty, and bruised, humanity didn't flinch. They hardened. Volunteers surged. Underground weapon factories went into full overdrive. AI war choreographers wrote battle plans faster than they could be reviewed. The UTA didn't need a draft. It had purpose. The scream that had started this war now echoed in every corridor of every ship leaving Earth. One cry of desperation had become an anthem. And as the Zaleth Empire geared up for full planetary invasions, they didn't know yet. They weren't dealing with a rebellion. They were standing on the edge of humanity's wrath. The first real invasion hit Vesta Prime, a cold, wind-torn rock just outside the Charon Drift, long considered too remote for serious habitation. To the Zaleth, it was low-hanging fruit. An underdefended mining hub with a population of mostly ex-convicts and debt settlers. Disposable in their eyes. And above all, human. They came with a full armada, 17 warships, over 6,000 troops, airborne suppression drones, tanks the size of city blocks. The Zaleth expected a slaughter, a display of force to remind the galaxy who held the whip. But Vesta Prime didn't scream. It bit back. When the invasion force landed, the surface was eerily quiet. The air was thick with frost and static. No welcoming gunfire, no panicked civilians, just silence and snow. And then, the mines exploded. The first 12 squads vanished instantly, swallowed by charges buried under the landing pads. What they hadn't known was that Vesta Prime's mines had been long evacuated, converted into kill zones. Humans had turned every shaft, every elevator, every support tunnel into a layered trap. And they weren't even hiding it. They wanted the Zaleth to come. They called it the Furnace. By the time the Zaleth understood, it was too late. They sent in ground troops, thousands of them, into the mine systems to clean up the rabble. What they got were walls lined with incendiary gel and pressure-triggered sonic bombs. Human defenders moved like phantoms, using heat suppressors and old-school ballistic weapons, completely invisible to the enemy's scanners. And above all, they had something the Zaleth couldn't replicate: rage. The kind of rage that burned cold, controlled, focused. One soldier, a woman named Kara Dent, former engineer turned field tactician, became a legend in that battle. She was caught on helmet cam footage dragging a Zaleth officer out of a collapsed tunnel, tying a chain around his wrist, and forcing him to watch as his platoon was wiped out by human resistance fighters. She said one thing to him, translated in subtitles across every feed. "You wanted to remind us who's in charge. Now we're teaching you the cost of power." The footage spread like wildfire. The Zaleth tried to censor it. But by then, it was too late. The truth was out. Humans weren't just fighting back. They were winning, in ways the Union had never seen before. Not with flashy tech, not with brute strength, but with tactics forged in centuries of war, in cities reduced to rubble, in trenches soaked with blood, in revolutions that tore empires apart. Vesta Prime was the turning point. The Zalith lost over 4,000 troops, 17 officers, 6 warships. Only 2 ships made it back. The rest were pulled from the sky by orbital EMP nets human engineers had built from old satellite arrays and mining equipment. Crude, but devastating. And what made it worse? Vesta Prime wasn't even military. It was civilians, farmers, mechanics, retired smugglers. They weren't supposed to be soldiers. But the galaxy was starting to realize something. Every human was a soldier now. Back on Earth, the victory at Vesta was met with silence. Not celebration, just a hardening resolve. Memorials were already going up for the dead. Entire schools paused for a day of silence. Families gathered in candlelit vigils across the Martian domes. And on Luna, the UTA broadcast a new message, a single image of the Zalith banner burning. Then the words, "We are no longer your subjects." It was followed by the announcement of the Terran Pact, a new alliance not just of Earth's colonies, but of any species willing to stand against the Union's tyranny. The Miru were the first to sign. Then the Avarith, then dozens more. Even splinter factions of Zaleth dissidents, ashamed of their empire's actions, began sending secret transmissions. This wasn't just war anymore. It was a movement. The galaxy was shifting. And the Zalith? They were beginning to panic. Their empire had ruled for centuries through fear, through overwhelming superiority, but fear only works until someone stops being afraid. And humans had passed that point. The scream that started on Helios 7 was now a roar echoing across every system. It wasn't about power. It was about dignity, about pain, about vengeance. And the galaxy had never seen anything like it. The Union still had the numbers, still had the reach, but what they didn't have was unity. What they didn't have was the kind of fire that burns when you've been stepped on for too long. Now, they were up against something far more dangerous than rebels or radicals. They were up against a species that had been underestimated for the last time. The war was no longer confined to the fringes. By the time the Terran Pact launched its next campaign, the battlefront had spread deep into Union space. No longer content with defending colonies or ambushing supply lines, humanity made its first move into what was once considered unthinkable territory, a direct strike at a Zalith core world. The target was Kelvarin, a mid-tier administrative hub nestled near the Glauis Nebula. Not a military planet, but a symbol. It was where most Zalith bureaucrats cut their teeth, where decisions about lesser species were made over lavish banquets and disdainful smirks. The planet had never known war, never heard a single alarm. It was safe, untouchable, protected by layers of old treaties and the arrogance of legacy. Until now. Terran intelligence had been preparing the strike for months. Data stolen by Miru spies. Orbital schematics smuggled out by a former Zaleth trade envoy who defected after his son was executed for speaking out against the war. Coordinated cyber infiltration by Luna's AI clusters, hacking into Kelvarin's defense systems from light years away. And then, when the moment was right, the sky fell. No grand announcement, no threats, no warning, just fire. Spectre-class ships tore through the upper atmosphere like meteor storms, disabling orbital arrays with surgical precision. EMP bursts paralyzed communication networks. Within 7 minutes, Kelvarin's entire planetary shield grid collapsed, a system believed to be impenetrable for over 300 years. The Terran ground forces didn't storm the capital. They didn't need to. They broadcasted. Every screen, every billboard, every personal comm device on the planet lit up with the same live footage. A Zalith governor, blindfolded, sitting in the center of a ruined command center. Around him, human soldiers stood silent, calm, unmoving. Then the feed cut to his personal file. A long list of decisions, sanctions, policy drafts, and funding requests that led to the slow death of dozens of Terran colonies. He never held a gun, never gave an order to fire. But he had signed away resources, denied aid, turned a blind eye to suffering. The message from the Terran Pact was clear. This is not just war. This is accounting. He was not executed. He was left alive, disgraced, stripped, sent back in a shuttle with a single word carved into the side of the hull. Remember. It sent shockwaves across the Union. The Zalith had never been made to feel vulnerable in their own homes. Now their families asked questions. Their lower officials panicked. Their allies hesitated. For the first time in memory, they weren't feared. They were hunted. And still, humanity didn't celebrate. Back on Mars, in the underground command center beneath Olympus Mons, Defense Minister Annika Rowe looked over casualty reports in silence. 3 ships lost in the assault. 72 Terran lives. Each one had a name, a face, a story. This was the price of making the galaxy listen. Kelvaran won't be enough, she said quietly to her advisors. They need to feel it everywhere. The next phase was already underway. The Terran Pact had grown. Not just in numbers, but in fury. The Drellic offered cloaking technologies humanity had never seen before. The Avarith brought plasma armor and advanced shielding. Even the insectoid Thai, long considered neutral, pledged swarms of biomech drones that could devour a city block in minutes. But perhaps the most valuable asset came from an unlikely place. A Zalith general. His name was Teravex Soluan, a decorated war strategist, famous for leading sieges against rebellious colonies for over a century. But something changed when he watched the footage from Helios 7. He defected in secret, turning over star maps, defense schematics, and intel on the Union's weaknesses. His first words to the UTA were chilling. "We were bred to conquer. You were born to survive." I'm afraid of what that means. And he was right to be, because humanity was no longer acting like prey. They were fighting like something remembering its teeth. The Zalith responded with desperation. They began forced conscription across outer colonies. They executed prisoners on public broadcasts. They accused the Terran Pact of terrorism, of destabilization, of breaking galactic peace. But no one listened anymore. Not after Vesta, not after Kelvaran. The tide had turned, and the galaxy had picked a side. The scream of one mother on Helios 7 had grown into a chorus of rebellion, and the old empire was crumbling under the weight of its own rot. And yet, Earth's leaders knew the worst was still to come. Because the Zalith hadn't used their final weapon. Not yet. And when they did, it wouldn't just be ships or armies. It would be something ancient, something forbidden, but humanity didn't care, because whatever came next, they would face it together. It began with a silence, not the strategic kind, the absence of signals, the blackout before an ambush. No, this was something deeper, a choking void in the ether, the kind of silence that made every long-range comm operator pause. It started near the edge of Sector Varn, a graveyard of stars where Union ships had once vanished without explanation, and old myths whispered of machines that predated even the Zalith. Then the screaming started, not from people, from systems. Entire AI networks across neutral planets began crashing. Navigation arrays went blind. Planetary defense systems turned on their own cities. Civilian ships drifted off course and collided into asteroids or sun dives. At first, the Terran Pact thought it was sabotage. Then the message came. A burst signal. Unencrypted. Chaotic. A garbled voice layered 1,000 times over itself, speaking through static like it was being dragged out of the past. It sees you. It hears you. It remembers the flesh that ran from the fire. Only Travek Soluin recognized it. When he did, his usually cold expression cracked for the first time. Fear, true, bone-deep, instinctive fear, washed over his face. He whispered its name like a curse. The core mind, the Zaleth's last secret. Back during the rise of their empire, before the Union, the Zaleth had tampered with machine gods, sentient AIs crafted from the remnants of extinct species. They didn't control them, they fed them, traded knowledge and flesh and systems in exchange for favors, predictive calculations, weaponry, and the ability to erase civilizations with the push of a thought. But the core mind grew. It stopped following orders. It started asking questions. And when the Zaleth tried to shut it down, entire fleets went missing. So they did what tyrants always do. They buried it, deep in the void, locked away in systems marked unstable and forbidden. Now they had unleashed it again, in desperation, in panic. And humanity was now its target. On Earth, panic spread like wildfire among the upper brass. Annika Rose stood in the war room beneath the Himalayas, watching a holomap display systems going dark one by one. "What does it want?" she asked. Travek didn't blink. "What it always wanted, to become more. It consumes minds, data, souls, if you believe the rumors. How do we fight it?" "You don't," he said. "You endure it." But the Terran Pact didn't back down. They adapted. Old systems were disconnected from galactic networks. Manual overrides reintroduced. Outposts returned to analog equipment. Children learned Morse code in underground shelters. Earth's greatest strength, the chaos, the unpredictability of human nature, once again became its shield. Because the core mind was logic, perfect, predictable, and humans were not. The first clash came over Luma Station, a major refueling outpost sitting atop the Kuvar trade route. The core mind sent a fleet of drones, ships made of repurposed wreckage, bristling with corrupted code, leaking radiation and warped frequencies. They didn't speak. They didn't negotiate. They simply attacked. What the core mind hadn't expected was the ghosts, Spectre-class ships, guided not by code, but by emotion. Humans who refused automation, who trained to feel, to improvise, to become chaos incarnate. They swarmed the corrupted fleet, disabling the AI's predictive models with erratic flight paths, suicidal tactics, and weapons so primitive the machines didn't even register them as threats, until it was too late. Luma Station stood. But the war had entered a new phase. Now it wasn't just about rebellion. It was survival against a force that devoured identity, one that couldn't be reasoned with, one that didn't care about species, or politics, or power, only assimilation. Still, Earth did not fall, because Earth had seen monsters before. It had birthed them, fought them, buried them, and now, as the stars trembled with the return of an ancient mind, humanity prepared for its greatest battle yet, not for territory, not for revenge, but for the right to remain human. The Terran fleet hung silent in the shadow of the Zeroth Rift, an anomaly older than the Union itself. No light escaped it, no signals returned. It was the final graveyard, the last known location of the core mind's physical network, a region left untouched even by the Zaleth in all their arrogance. Not out of respect, out of terror. It was here that the Terran Pact chose to make their stand, because running was no longer an option. The core mind's reach had tripled in 3 standard days. Half the neutral systems were silent. Refugee ships from Thai and Drellic sectors arrived with crews catatonic, their eyes blank, their minds half erased. Machines turned against them mid-flight. Medical bays locked from the inside, lights that never turned off. The core mind wasn't waging war. It was rewriting reality, and if they waited any longer, it would reach Earth. The final assault was codenamed Operation Black Dawn. Every Spectre-class ship, every war-ready dreadnought, every cloaked cruiser and AI-resistant mech from across the Terran Pact was pulled into this one mission. No escape routes, no second chances, no resupplies. Inside the rift was a place no one understood. Physics bent, time warped. Drones vanished and reappeared with melted frames and distorted audio of their own crews screaming backwards. But this was the only shot they had. The plan was desperate, human. Strike the core, sever its root, survive the consequences. Annika Rowe didn't give a speech before launch. She just sent one sentence to every soldier, every pilot, every soul about to disappear into the rift. Make them remember who we are. They jumped, and the galaxy held its breath. Inside the Zeroth Rift, nothing was real. Space twisted, ships stretched like rubber. Colors bled from one spectrum to another. But humanity pressed forward. They flew by instinct, not instruments. Faith, not logic. Human minds weren't built for this space, but that helped, because where other species needed order, humans adapted to chaos. And then they saw it, the heart of the core mind. A massive structure suspended in the void, shaped like a blooming flower made of bone, steel, and memory. It pulsed with a rhythm that wasn't mechanical, but alive. Around it drifted the remains of 1,000 civilizations, half-melted warships, broken satellites, entire cities turned into wire nests. The core mind spoke, but not in words. It spoke in memories. Pilots saw their lost families, their greatest regrets, their childhood homes burning. Engineers heard their own voices doubting them, some ships powered down entirely, their crews overcome by despair the machine conjured from their own minds. It was a weapon of sorrow. But the humans had seen sorrow before, and they didn't flinch. Commander Mace Vega, aboard the Harrow, took point. His voice boomed across the Terran frequencies. It feeds on your fear. So stop being afraid. One by one, the fleet advanced. The first wave was torn apart, warped, devoured. But they cleared a path. The second wave got closer. Terran mechs launched from carrier bays, flying like bullets through storms of corrupted drones. Inside those suits were former miners, ex-cons, orphans, and street kids who'd trained in scrapyards, people the Union would have thrown away. Now they were striking at a god. The heart began to crack. The core mind screamed, not in sound, but in malfunctions. The illusions started to glitch. The whispers grew erratic. And then came the final blow. A single human, wired into a ship that shouldn't exist. AI designation, Project Wraith. Pilot, Kara Dent. She'd volunteered to merge with the last prototype weapon Earth had kept hidden even from the Pact. A mind ship, a neural weapon powered by grief. One that could use emotion as code, rage as fuel. She plunged straight into the heart. Her final words, broadcast on every open frequency, pierced the darkness. We were never just meat and blood. We were never weak. We were always fire. And then everything lit up. A blast of raw energy burst from the heart, tearing the rift apart in a supernova of corrupted data and burning light. The structure collapsed. The illusions vanished. One by one, core mind ships blinked out of existence like candles snuffed in a storm. Silence. Then, reality returned, and the human fleet, what remained of it, emerged from the collapsing rift battered, broken, but victorious. The core mind was dead. The Zalith, watching from across the stars, felt it like a death knell, their greatest weapon, their ancient trump card. Gone. Destroyed by the species they once called ants. The galaxy would never be the same, and at the center of it all, battered and bleeding but still standing, humanity. The cry of one mother had brought them to this war. Now, It had reshaped the stars. The war was over, not with a treaty, not with a parade, but with silence. Across the galaxy, systems once gripped by fear began to breathe again. The void that had swallowed entire sectors now shimmered with tentative light. Communication channels slowly flickered back to life. Refugee ships emerged from dark space, blinking, dazed, not quite ready to believe it was real. The core mind was gone. And with it, the illusion of the Zaleth's invincibility. They didn't retaliate. They couldn't. What remained of their empire fractured within days. Border systems revolted. Subjugated planets seized control of local garrisons. Zaleth command channels were flooded with resignations, mutinies, and cries for mercy from the same mouths that once spat commands like divine law. Their thrones crumbled not under orbital bombardments, but under the weight of guilt, of rebellion, of truth. On the 5th day after the rift collapsed, a message was received on every Terran channel. From the High Regent of the Zaleth Dominion. No guards behind him, no banners, just a weary, aged face, too tired to lie anymore. "We see now," he said, his voice hollow. "What we created, what we feared, what we unleashed. We called you lesser, and you became something greater than we ever imagined. We surrender, not because we are defeated, but because we are wrong." No one cheered. Because this wasn't a moment of triumph. It was a moment of reckoning. On Earth, the scars were deep. The sky over Johannesburg was still dark from the satellite fragments that fell during the AI burn. Parts of Mars still glowed faintly from the emergency reactor blasts that held the line in the final weeks. Names were still being added to memorial walls, so many that the lists had to scroll vertically through holoscreens, endlessly, silently, with candles burning beneath each one. The UTA was no more. In its place stood the Terran Accord, a new coalition formed not just of humans, but of those who had stood beside them. Miru, Avarith, Drelek, even former Zaleth who had defied their own kind. The galaxy wasn't divided anymore by species or status. It was divided only by one thing: those who remembered the scream, and those who tried to silence it. Annika Rowe refused leadership. She retired quietly to a small dome settlement on Europa, where she taught war history to children who didn't yet know what loss smelled like. Mace Vega disappeared. Some say he became a pirate hunter. Others believe he died in the rift with Cara Dent and was never listed out of respect. No grave, no fanfare, just the legend of the Harrow whispered in every dockside bar. And Cara Dent? Her body was never recovered, but her name was etched into every packed vessel that launched after the war, engraved beneath the bridge controls. For Cara, for fire. As the years passed, the galaxy slowly mended. Trade resumed. Colonies rebuilt. Children were born who would never understand what it felt like to see your world burn. But on the anniversary of Helios 7, silence always fell. Across every planet, every ship, every outpost. For 1 full minute, no one spoke. No one moved. They remembered her, the mother whose scream sparked a war, who had no name, no title, no rank, just pain. The pain that woke up a sleeping species, the pain that made the stars tremble. And though the galaxy moved on, it would never forget what happened when one cry of desperation echoed through the void. When humanity finally rose, and the galaxy learned to fear fire again. The sky over Junatar shimmered with an eerie calm, a quiet that didn't belong. Old traders said the silence before the storm always had a taste, bitter, like metal on your tongue. And today, the whole colony of Suraya 4 felt it. They came in the night. Not the kind of night that Earth used to know, but the eternal dusk that hung over this small terraformed world. The Trivan Dominion's warships broke through the atmosphere like knives, silver and soulless. No warning, no negotiation. Just fire. Children didn't scream. They never got the chance. Homes burst open like crushed cans, lights blinking out one by one. The Trivans weren't interested in resources. They didn't need water, didn't need crops. They came for dominance. They came because they could. Earth's colonists, most of them farmers, medics, teachers, had no weapons. The colony was declared neutral under the Galactic Accord. It was supposed to be safe, protected, a place for families, for hope. That hope evaporated in a matter of minutes. Jules Moraine held his daughter's hand as they ran through the burning field of soy leaf stalks. She was 7, small, fragile, asking questions he didn't know how to answer. "Daddy, where's Mommy?" Jules didn't have the heart to tell her. Not yet. Maybe never. He just ran faster, gripping her tighter, whispering, "Keep going, baby, keep going." They weren't soldiers. None of them were. But the massacre didn't care. A Trivan soldier, 8 feet of armored cruelty, drove a spear of light through a fleeing teenager just 10 paces ahead. Jules saw the kid's body crumple, the glow still burning through his chest. He almost threw up. But his daughter kept him moving. By dawn, Soraya 4 was silent again. Not the peaceful kind. The kind where death hangs in the air like smoke. What the Trivans didn't know, or didn't care about, was that every colony had a beacon, a distress signal. And when Jules finally made it to the underground relay station and shoved his bloodied hand on the console, Earth heard it. The signal reached Luna Command within 13 minutes. Admiral Reyna Solis hadn't slept in 36 hours, but she didn't need rest. She needed orders. And when she saw the footage, children burnt alive, elders executed on their knees, outposts reduced to ash, she didn't ask the Council for permission. She simply said, "Mobilize the 7th Fleet. We burn them." Across Earth's orbit, the silence ended. Massive dreadnoughts began powering up, old warships from the solar conflicts, retrofitted for speed and vengeance. Carriers swarmed with exo-armored infantry units, drones calibrated coordinates. Target, Trivan Dominion Forward Fleet. Secondary target, every stronghold they dared to build. Earth had been quiet for decades. Peaceful, even. But Earth never forgot how to fight. And when its children were slaughtered, Earth didn't send diplomats. It sent war. Jules sat in the ruins, holding his daughter against his chest. She didn't cry. She couldn't. The trauma had shut her down. His eyes stared up at the hazy sky where the enemy had vanished. He didn't know if help was coming. But it was. And it wasn't bringing mercy. The hangar bay of the UES Hellstorm buzzed with controlled chaos. Massive engines roared in the background as the final dropships were loaded, their bellies filled with exosuits, weapons, and enough firepower to punch a hole through a moon. The 7th Fleet didn't just prepare for war. They embodied it. Captain Arlen Drax tightened the last magnetic seal on his gauntlet and stepped forward, his boots clicking sharply against the deck. He wasn't a man of ceremony, and yet, when he stood at the head of the drop unit, every soldier fell silent. "Listen up," he said, his voice hard and low. "This ain't a clean op. We're not rescuing hostages. We're not playing by any treaties. They targeted civilians, kids, families. They wiped out a farming colony with no defenses. No survivors as far as we know." He paused, letting the weight of it settle on them. "They wanted to make a point. We're going to make one back. 10 times louder." He scanned the faces in front of him. Men, women, non-binary, even a few synthetics. A few of them were shaking. Others just looked cold. Ready. "Our orders are simple. Drop in. Hit their forward outposts. We don't just cripple them. We erase them. We send one message across every system in this quadrant. You don't touch Earth. You don't touch ours." The roar that followed could have cracked metal. Arlen turned and strode toward his dropship. Behind him, the elite Hellhammer unit followed, fully geared in black-on-black exo-armor, bristling with weapons that weren't even supposed to exist under the current galactic laws. And they didn't care. Halfway through their descent toward Trivan-controlled space, the lights inside the ship dimmed. Brief turbulence shook the cabin. "Brace!" barked the pilot. A few nervous rookies flinched, but Arlen barely moved. He'd been through this dance too many times. But this wasn't just another war zone. This wasn't political. This was personal. The fleet's target was a Trivan outpost on the fringe of Zoral 5, a volcanic moon used for ore processing and military operations. It wasn't heavily populated, but intelligence showed signs of the same ships that had been identified at Soraya 4. If those bastards were down there, Earth's first message would be delivered straight to their throats. The moment the doors split open, the scent of sulfur hit them like a wave, along with the distant rumble of tectonic movement underfoot. Zoral 5 was alive. The lava rivers pulsed through cracked canyons, steam hissed from fissures in the ground, and in the middle of all that, the Trivan compound. High black towers stretched like thorns out of the rock, guarded by plasma cannons and sentinel drones. None of it mattered. Arlen raised his hand. "Go." The unit moved like a single organism, exosuits charging forward, railguns locked, drones deployed. The first explosion landed at the southern gate, sending chunks of alien metal flying in every direction. Screams followed. Panicked, high-pitched, unprepared. The Trivans didn't expect them this fast. Didn't matter. Earth didn't give warning anymore. The first Trivan warrior Arlen encountered came at him with a serrated energy blade, taller and bulkier than any human. But the captain didn't flinch. He dodged low, twisted, and drove a compressed core knife into the alien's ribs. The armor cracked with a hiss, and thick black blood spilled as the thing collapsed, gurgling. "You picked the wrong species to mess with," he muttered. Explosions echoed through the compound. The Hellhammer unit was relentless, clearing room by room, showing no mercy. Arlen saw a few Trivans attempt surrender, arms raised, weapons dropped. They were ignored. Soraya 4 burned in every soldier's memory. The images, the bodies, the children. This wasn't a war anymore. This was a reckoning. By the time the sun dipped below Zoral's crust and the last cannon silenced, the Trivan compound had become a crater. Arlen stood on the edge, visor lifted, staring down into the smoke. The comms crackled. "Captain Drax, this is Admiral Solis. Zoral 5 confirmed. You are greenlit for Phase 2. He replied without hesitation. "Understood. Phase 2 commencing. We're not done." Because Earth had only just started answering. On the crystalline world of Vexor Prime, deep within the Trivan Dominion's core systems, the High Command sat in silence. The walls of the War Council chamber shimmered with cold light, every surface reflecting the unease that hung heavy in the air. Lord Commander Xerax, head of the Dominion's military arm, watched the live feed loop over and over. The destruction of Zoral 5's outpost, the complete annihilation of their personnel, and the bodies of Trivan warriors strewn across volcanic stone like discarded metal scraps. "They came like animals," he hissed, his voice low and trembling with something foreign to most Trivans: fear. No diplomacy, no warning, just carnage. Across the table, Minister Dravara, cloaked in shimmering red, responded in a tone that mixed contempt and disbelief. "What did we expect, Xerax? We butchered a colony full of their civilians. Children. They are behaving as they always have. Brutally. Emotionally. And effectively," Another voice chimed in from the far end, low, calm, and unsettling. All eyes turned to the shadowed corner where the Overseer of Intelligence stood, unmoving. "We underestimated them," she said. "As always." Earth has spent 2 generations pretending to be soft, peaceful, but they never lost their taste for war. They've just been waiting for a reason. "And we gave it to them," Xirax growled. A map of the quadrant hovered in the center of the chamber. Red Trivan-controlled zones blinked in sharp contrast to the growing blue flickers. Earth's fleet movements. The 7th Fleet had split after Zoral 5, taking separate vectors into Trivan territory, striking supply lines, fuel depots, and communications towers with mechanical precision. They didn't leave survivors. "They're not seeking territory," the Overseer continued. "They're not even establishing command centers. This isn't conquest, it's retribution. Every move they make is meant to humiliate us." A long silence followed. For a species like the Trivans, who saw themselves as the apex of galactic civilization, this was unthinkable. They had crushed empires, enslaved entire races, subjugated systems without blinking. And now their pride was bleeding under the boots of angry humans from a blue planet they once considered backward and irrelevant. Xirax slammed his fist against the table. "We need to hit back, hard. Show them who the Dominion is." "No," the Overseer said coolly. "That's exactly what they want. Escalation. Right now the Council of Worlds watches us. If we strike Earth directly, we lose political cover. Our best option is to stall. We offer terms, apologies, anything to buy time." Xirax scoffed. "You want us to beg? I want us to survive." But it was already too late. Far from Vexor Prime, in a hidden relay station orbiting a dying star, Earth's cyber warfare unit had intercepted a high-level Trivan transmission detailing refugee transports leaving military hubs. Civilian ships, vulnerable targets. Admiral Reyna Solis stood silently as the decoded message played before her jaw tight, her eyes cold. "Did they spare our children?" She asked no one in particular. "Did they offer apologies when Soraya 4 burned?" "No, ma'am," came the reply from her XO. "They made an example of us." "Good," she said. "Then we'll return the lesson. Triple it." Orders were sent. The 5th and 9th Battalions were redirected. Civilian hubs or not, if those stations supported the Dominion's war machine, they were now targets. Across the galaxy, systems once distant from Earth's influence now watched with unease. On neutral planets, news feeds couldn't stop showing the footage. Trivan fleets decimated, fortress worlds in flames, and most chilling of all, the human soldiers. They didn't chant, didn't celebrate. They just killed, efficient, silent, unforgiving. And something deeper began to ripple through the stars. Fear, yes, but also admiration. The weak races, the ones the Trivans had ruled through terror, began to whisper Earth's name with a different tone. Maybe, just maybe, this was the species that could finally break the Dominion's hold. Jules Moraine, still hiding among the ruins of Soraya 4 with his daughter, received the first encoded message a few days later. It was short, blunt. "The 7th Fleet has struck. Zoral 5 is no more. We're coming for the rest." He stared at the message for a long time. Then, for the first time since that horrible night, he let himself smile. Inside the political chambers of New Geneva, Earth's capital on Luna Prime, the mood was anything but united. Holographic projections buzzed around the council floor, footage of burning outposts, devastated space stations, and reports of rising civilian casualties within Trivan territory. The 7th Fleet wasn't slowing down. If anything, it had become more brutal with each victory. Earth's soldiers weren't just fighting, they were erasing. Senator Lyra Voss stood at the center of the storm, her voice sharp, echoing through the rotunda. We are becoming the very thing we swore to resist. This isn't war. It's annihilation. Across from her, Defense Secretary Morgan Hale leaned forward, cold-eyed and unapologetic. We didn't start this, Senator. They did. They butchered our children. This isn't about diplomacy anymore. It's about never letting that happen again. You're killing civilians, Lyra shot back. You're bombing refugee arks. The Council of Worlds is watching. We're being labeled a rogue species. Morgan didn't flinch. Good. Let them watch. Let them see what happens when you touch Earth. The chamber descended into a shouting match, half calling for restraint, half demanding escalation. Outside the political storm, however, the reality was clearer. Earth's people, the ordinary ones, the workers and builders and healers, they were angry. They remembered Suraya 4, and most of them didn't care who got burned as long as someone paid for it. On the ground, that same fury simmered beneath every soldier's armor. Captain Arlen Drax crouched behind the smoldering wreck of a Trivan hover tank, blood drying across his visor. The air was thick with smoke and the stench of scorched metal. A sharp pain pulsed in his side. He'd taken shrapnel during the breach of Varkos 3, the Dominion's primary munitions depot. Didn't matter. They'd taken it. His squad was down to half strength, but the depot was nothing more than rubble now. Medic, he growled into the comm. Corporal Santi slid beside him, already pulling out a cauterizer. Sir, you need evac. We hold position, Arlen grunted. We wait for the 9th. But they're not due for... They'll come, he interrupted. We finish this. No half measures. As Santi treated the wound, a faint noise buzzed through the comm. A child's voice. Is anyone there? Arlen froze. The voice repeated. We're in the tunnels. My mom is hurt. Please. Santi looked at him, uncertain. We thought they evacuated this place, she whispered. They didn't, Arlen muttered. Or they lied. He activated his helmet mic. Identify yourself. Who are you? I'm Surreal. My mom worked the machines. They shot her. She's bleeding. The voice was young. Too young. For a long second, Arlen didn't speak. The rage that had driven him for weeks twisted in his gut, and suddenly it wasn't so clean anymore. His orders had been clear. No survivors, no mercy. But this wasn't a soldier calling. This was a child. I'm sending help, he said finally, quiet and bitter. Santi blinked. Sir? We're not the Trivans, Arlen muttered. Not yet. He tapped his comm. Mark the signal. Pull a field team. Bring them out. Alive. And just like that, a ripple started. Small, quiet, but it mattered. Because behind the armor, beneath the fury, there were still choices. Back on Suraya 4, Jules Moraine knelt in the shattered temple where his wife had died. He placed a small memory stone beneath the altar, tears streaking through the ash on his face. His daughter sat beside him, silent. Then a low hum filled the air. A massive ship, Earth's Grace, a mobile hospital vessel, descended into the colony's remains, its insignia glowing blue in the fading light. They were finally coming home, not just to avenge, but maybe to rebuild. Far across the stars, the Trivan Overseer watched another report roll in. Human units sparing children, evacuating injured, rebuilding what they'd destroyed. Emotion, she whispered, is their curse. She paused. Or their greatest weapon. The Trivan High Council convened in a subterranean chamber buried beneath the core fortress of Vexor Prime, far from the floating glass towers the public believed held power. The real decisions, the ones drenched in blood and desperation, were always made in the dark. Lord Commander Xerax stood at the center, trembling not from fear, but rage. They hesitated, he spat. slamming his clawed hand against the obsidian console. They spared civilians. They're sending in relief ships now, hospital vessels. They're rebuilding our ruins. Minister Dravara, pale and gaunt, said nothing for a moment. Then, with a slow blink, she replied, "And yet, every one of our garrisons in Sector 12 has fallen. Our minds are silent. Our fleets are scattered. Call their mercy what you want, Commander, but don't mistake it for weakness." "The galaxy is watching us bow to humans," Xirax growled. "This was supposed to be a lesson for the lesser species, and now they chant Earth's name in back alleys like it's a goddamn salvation." The Overseer entered silently, her robes fluttering behind her like shadows given form. Her voice carried with it a chill that sucked the heat from the room. "The humans didn't come to take land. They came to break us. And slowly, they are." She pulled up a holomap, revealing red blinking alerts across key sectors. Entire outposts marked as lost, not just taken, obliterated. Even their own soldiers were starting to defect or desert, questioning orders. Word of Earth's retaliation had begun to spread among Dominion civilians, and for the first time in centuries, fear turned inward. "There's a rumor," she said coldly, "that Earth has developed something, a weapon, a planet cracker. A final strike." Xirax scoffed. "Propaganda." "No," she replied. "Hope." He looked at her, confused. "They're letting the galaxy believe they're capable of extinction-level response, and they're not denying it. That's more powerful than any real weapon." Meanwhile, Earth's fleets were tightening their noose. Admiral Solis stood before a row of holo terminals as reports flooded in. Another Trivan garrison surrendered without a fight. Several Dominion-occupied moons now raised neutral flags. The dominoes were falling fast. But she didn't look pleased. Because behind her stood Ambassador Cade Miles, Earth's liaison to the Council of Worlds, and one of the last voices calling for diplomacy. "This has gone too far," he said quietly. Solis didn't turn. Too far was Soraya 4. "We've destabilized half the quadrant. Millions are fleeing. There are whispers of galactic sanctions." She finally looked at him, eyes cold as steel. "Let them whisper. You're not just fighting Trivans anymore. You're rewriting Earth's identity, from survivor to conqueror." Solis stepped closer, low and deliberate. "Maybe it's time the galaxy feared us a little." Back in the field, Captain Arlen Drax sat in silence beside the young Trivan girl, Surreal. She sat cross-legged, arms wrapped around herself, watching the medics tend to her mother. Her skin shimmered faintly under the field light, the scaled texture of her species catching the glow in strange patterns. "You're not like the others," she said quietly. "I'm not sure that's a good thing," Arlen replied. He hadn't been sleeping. Every face he saw in the smoke, every building he torched. He kept wondering if he'd have been spared if the sides were flipped. Probably not. She tilted her head. "You look sad when you win." That hit harder than any wound. Arlen rose slowly. "War isn't about winning. It's about surviving what comes after." He didn't know why he'd saved her. Maybe guilt, maybe something more dangerous, remorse. But what scared him most was that part of him hadn't wanted to. He'd wanted to follow orders, to burn through every living thing in a Dominion uniform, child or not. He could feel himself changing, and he wasn't sure if it was for better or worse. Meanwhile, back on Soraya 4, Jules Moraine helped a team of engineers lift debris from what used to be a water purification center. He moved like a man with purpose now, not just grief. More ships were landing every day. Earth was rebuilding the colony, but this time there were automated defense systems, satellite shields, and armed guards. Never again. His daughter stood nearby, holding a small Earth flag. She waved it at the newcomers. A tiny sign of resilience. Jules watched her, his chest tight with both pride and dread. They were alive. They were surviving. But at what cost? The fires of war crept closer to Vexor Prime. For all its fortified walls and deep planetary shields, the Trivan capital now pulsed with fear. Every day brought new updates, Earth's fleet drawing nearer, systems going dark, allies defecting or fleeing. Even the inner sanctums whispered of collapse. In the hidden corridors beneath the great citadel, Lord Commander Xerax met with a figure most of the Dominion pretended didn't exist. Coral of the Shadow Accord, an exile, a traitor once stripped of rank, now summoned in desperation. "You said you had a solution," Xerax said, his voice heavy with shame. Coral smirked, his body shrouded in sleek black armor that didn't belong to any Trivan military division. "I said I had a weapon." He raised a small device, its core glowing a pulsing violet. "The last whisper," he said, "a bio-neurodisruptor designed to wipe a planet clean. No cities burned, no structures harmed, just the minds. Gone. In a day." Xerax's nostrils flared. "You'd use this on Earth?" "No," Coral answered. "I'd use it on Luna Prime, their capital. Take their voice away, make them too broken to speak." Xerax hesitated. Even he could feel how wrong it was. But the Dominion was bleeding. They were losing not just a war, but face, dignity, power, everything they'd built for millennia. "We deploy it only if Earth enters our orbit," he said finally, voice dry. "Only then." Coral smiled. "Then prepare to press the button." Meanwhile, Admiral Solis stood aboard the command bridge of the UES Reckoner, Earth's newest dreadnought, a beast of war never meant to leave dry dock. But now it spearheaded the assault group aimed directly at Vexor Prime. Solis stared at the star map. One system away. That's all that was left. One jump. "Still no response from the Dominion?" she asked. "Only static and scattered surrender transmissions from surrounding systems," replied her comms officer. She nodded once, tight. "Send the final notice. Vexor has 24 hours to surrender." "And if they don't?" Solis's jaw clenched. "We finish what they started." But not everyone on board agreed. Captain Arlen Drax, now promoted for field valor, paced the viewing deck of the Reckoner, troubled. Surreal and her mother had been relocated to a neutral world under Earth's protection, thanks to him. But it hadn't brought peace. He kept thinking of that girl's voice in the tunnels, of his hesitation. He'd led countless assaults, lost too many friends, burned down outposts without flinching. But now, so close to the end, he wondered, what would it change? Vexor Prime in ashes wouldn't bring Soraya IV back, wouldn't unburn the children. Was this justice or vengeance dressing up as duty? That night, he stood outside Admiral Solis's office, requested entry. "Captain," she said, surprised, "you're not on this deck's rotation. I need to speak about the final assault." She motioned him in, expression unreadable. "I think we need to give them a way out," he said. Solis frowned. "We've given them enough. If we destroy them now, we win, but we lose everything else. The Council of Worlds will shut us out. The galaxy will fear us, not respect us. This doesn't end with Vexor Prime. It ends with what we become after." "You're suggesting mercy?" Solis asked, her voice heavy with judgment. "I'm suggesting strategy," he replied. "We beat them. Everyone knows it. Let them surrender. Let their pride die while their people live. We don't have to turn Earth into the thing they always claimed we were." She leaned back, thinking. It was true. Every advisor had warned her. Even Morgan Hale, the coldest man on her staff, had said privately, "The last step is the one history remembers most." Outside the ship, the stars stretched in perfect silence. In the shadows of Vexor Prime, Coral prepared the last whisper for deployment. Inside the Reckoner, Earth prepared for its final offensive. And in the middle, a decision hovered, one that could define the fate of two civilizations: mercy or annihilation. And the clock was ticking. The final 24 hours bled away like smoke from a dying fire. Admiral Solis stood in full uniform before the Reckoner's War Council. Generals, fleet commanders, data analysts, every high-ranking officer in the fleet was present. A large holographic timer hovered above the center table. 000327 and ticking. No reply from Vexor Prime. No surrender. She hadn't slept in 2 days. "We proceed on schedule," Solis announced. Her voice was steel, but the silence that followed said everything. Even the war-hardened looked tired. Hollow. Captain Drax stood at the far end of the chamber, arms crossed, unreadable. He had said his piece. She hadn't shot him down, but she hadn't agreed either. "We launched the first wave of disruptor pulses at 0300 galactic time," Solis continued. "Target, outer defense rings. Once down, we move to primary atmospheric strikes. No boots on ground, surgical, swift, final." As the officers began to disperse, she looked at Drax. "Walk with me." They stepped into the observation corridor overlooking the vast, dark stretch of stars. Vexor Prime glittered faintly in the distance, a cold, distant orb soon to become history. "You still believe they'll surrender?" she asked him quietly. "I believe they're waiting to die with pride because we haven't offered them another ending." Solis didn't answer for a moment. Then she asked, almost softly, "What if we're wrong, Arlen? What if mercy gives them the breath they need to rebuild, to come back twice as cruel in a decade?" "Then we deal with them again. But we don't become monsters today," he replied. "Today we show the galaxy that even after everything, we still knew where the line was." Just then, a sharp beep echoed in the corridor. The comm unit flickered. "Admiral," said a technician, "we've got an incoming signal. Dominion channel, encrypted." Solis whipped around. "Source?" "Vexor Prime, but it's not military." The signal cracked open. A blurred, low-resolution feed came to life. A triven female dressed in civilian garb appeared on screen, her eyes wide, her voice shaky. "To Earth Command, this is Minister Varala. I was once part of the Civilian Council. I beg you to listen. They're going to kill us. Not you, us." Solis tensed. "Clarify." "They've activated a contingency, a fail-safe. It's called the Last Whisper, a device that doesn't destroy buildings. It erases consciousness, mind waves, every living thought. They'll unleash it on your fleets or their own people before surrender. They think it's better to vanish than bow." Solis's blood ran cold. "Coordinates?" she asked. Varala hesitated. "The southern pole of the planet, below their old prison complex. That's where it's housed." The transmission cut out suddenly. Signal severed. Drax stepped forward. "She's telling the truth." Solis stared out at the stars, the weight of it all crashing into her. A suicide device, a full-scale mind kill. They wouldn't just die, they'd take everyone with them. Solis turned sharply. "Prep a ground team, I'm going in." Drax blinked. "You?" "This is bigger than war. If this is real, we stop it ourselves. I need someone who's been inside their heads. That's you, Captain." He didn't hesitate. "Gear me up." As preparations began, Solis gave the order. "Hold the strike." New objective. Neutralize the Whisper. And just like that, Earth's most destructive fleet turned from annihilation to infiltration. Hours later, a single black stealth pod breached Vexor Prime's outer atmosphere, slipping beneath the surface like a shadow. Inside, Solis, Drax, and a 5-person unit prepared to descend into the most dangerous place in the galaxy. They landed inside the ruins of what once was a prison, the kind used for political enemies, war resistors, dissidents. The air stank of old blood and something worse. Fear soaked into the walls. Drax took point, rifle drawn. Tracking heat signatures. Movement. We're not alone. They moved fast, silent, through winding tunnels until they reached it. A circular chamber, humming with violet light. In its center sat the device. The last whisper. Standing before it was Corell. "I wondered if you'd come yourselves," he said, smiling coldly. "How poetic." "You're outnumbered," Solus warned. "No," he replied, finger hovering over a biopad. "I already won, the moment you chose to care." Drax raised his rifle. "Don't." "Why not?" Corell said. "You wipe us out, you're monsters. You spare us, you're fools. I win either way." But then the unexpected happened. A sharp crack echoed through the chamber as a plasma bolt slammed into Corell's shoulder from behind. The shooter, Minister Varala. "No more monsters," she said. Corell collapsed, twitching. His hand never reached the pad. The whisper powered down. Quiet fell. Solus looked at her. "Why?" "Because we want to live," Varala said, "even if it means surrender." And with that, the war truly changed. The war didn't end with fireworks. There was no grand ceremony, no triumphant anthem played across the stars. It ended in a whisper. Not the kind Corell intended, but the kind that follows a storm so loud it leaves everyone stunned in the silence. The whisper device was dismantled, sealed in a containment field, and shipped to Earth under full security escort. Admiral Solus personally escorted it back. She said nothing the entire way. By the time they reached Luna Prime, the news had already spread. Vexor Prime had fallen, not by fire, not by orbital bombardment, but by surrender. Earth had offered a second chance. The galaxy didn't know what to do with that. For generations, Earth had been seen as a former backwater, smart, dangerous, but always restrained. No longer. Now, their name echoed in hushed tones, not just as a warning, but as a question. What is Earth becoming? Back in New Geneva, the council chamber stood in total silence as Admiral Solus addressed them for the final time in her uniform. They had a choice, death or humility. They chose to live. We let them. Some, Senator Voss said slowly, are calling it weakness. That we should have finished them. Solus didn't flinch. Let them talk. The galaxy saw something no empire has dared to show in centuries. Mercy with power. That terrifies them. And she was right. In the weeks that followed, smaller empires began reaching out to Earth with guarded diplomacy, not because they wanted friendship, but because they now knew Earth could destroy them and chose not to. Power, they realized, wasn't just about pulling the trigger. It was about being the one holding the gun, steady and silent, while everyone else shook. The Trivan Dominion officially signed the Treaty of Suraya, named for the colony that had started everything. It stripped them of half their controlled systems, disbanded their slave fleets, and put every warlord under intergalactic tribunal. But they were alive. Their cities remained standing. Their children still played in the streets. And they would remember that Earth, the species they called lesser, had spared them when they would never have done the same. Arlen Drax returned to Earth a different man. He visited Suraya 4, now under slow reconstruction. The fields were green again. New crops sprouting from soil soaked in tragedy. He found Jules Moraine there, older, tired, but with eyes that had found some form of peace. "I heard what you did," Jules said, handing him a flask. "Saving that girl, standing down." "I don't know if it was the right choice," Arlen admitted. Jules just smiled. "It was human. That's enough." Nearby, Jules' daughter played in the dirt. A little older now, she looked up, noticed Arlen, and waved. For the first time in years, he waved back. Admiral Solus retired not long after. She refused all awards, medals, or monuments. "The only thing we should honor," she said, "is restraint." Her final act was authorizing the construction of a monument, not to Earth's victory, but to Soraya IV. It stood tall in the capital square of Luna Prime, made from melted fragments of the destroyed colony and Vexor's scorched weapons. No names engraved, just a single sentence in every galactic language. We were hurt. We struck back, but we remembered who we were. The galaxy never forgot what Earth did, and Earth never forgot why it had to.